David approaches that giant, and you don't need to know what a cubit is or a shekel is to know that he was giant. And the story tells us that he fells this fierce Goliath with his sling and his stones. And then he takes Goliath's life by taking his head. And David is rewarded handsomely, and this simple shepherd goes on to do a great many good and some bad things. The story is captivating not only for the way it affects the life and stories of the people in the Bible as it unfolds, but it's captivating as a story because it is a prototypical underdog tale. This lowly shepherd, one of many sons with little prospects, untrained, unlike some of his brothers who are soldiers in Saul's army, this lowly shepherd manages to defeat this enormous champion from the other side. A fighter who had taunted Saul's army over and over again. Up comes David, who refuses to even wear armor and uses not a sword, but a sling and some stones. All it took to defeat this tyrannical enemy was 5 smooth stones and a courageous heart. It will come as no surprise to most of you that I am not a biblical literalist. I doubt that this story actually happened, but it doesn't matter to me if it happened or not, because it teaches me a truth that I do believe because I have seen it. There is such a thing as an unexpected hero. There are times when the underdog rises up, when the seemingly powerless side defeats the seemingly unstoppable foe. David can win, and he can do it with the tools he already has. He doesn't need any fancy clothing or weapons. He just uses what is his already. Among our 20th century Unitarian luminaries was a man named James Luther Adams. He was a parish minister, a professor, a prolific author. He is responsible for writing the 5 smooth stones of religious liberalism. JLA, as we affectionately call him, outlines the 5 smooth stones in an essay in his compiled work on being human religiously. The first stone, he writes, is that meaning has not been finally captured. What he means is what we say here often, nothing is finished, nothing is over. Put in other words, revelation is continuous. The result of this is that everything can be critiqued, new information can always be incorporated. Things are not complete. We are unfolding. Existence is unfolding. We are growing and changing and journeying on. The second stone is that relations between persons ought ideally to rest on mutual free consent and not on coercion. Loyalty and conviction should be freely given. We are free to determine whether or not we want to walk alongside each other on this journey. We are free to determine what meaning to make out of this unfolding. The third stone, he writes, is that we are obligated morally to, quote, work toward the establishment of a just and loving community. This community we seek is human, exists in time and space. And it is, he says, an achievement of freedom with respect to material resources as well as with respect to spiritual resources. It isn't enough to live by the Spirit. We have to do. It isn't enough to have faith in a world to come after death. We have to take this world and make it as just and loving as possible. The fourth stone, that organization makes possible the establishment of a loving community. Intentional, organized social behavior. He writes, no one can properly put faith in merely individual virtue, even though that is a prerequisite for societal virtues. The faith of the liberal must express itself in societal forms. Without these, freedom and justice in community are impossible. So faith is only worthwhile, only good, only adequate, he writes, if it leads us to give time and energy to changing policies, politics, society, education. We have to organize power because it is through the human exercise of organized power that we will affect change. The fifth stone, put simply, is optimism. The idea that available to all of us are resources, JLA would say human and divine resources, that justify seeing the universe unfolding in a positive way. Not a blind optimism, he says, but maybe a willful one. He writes that with all the realism and tough-mindedness that can be mustered, the genuine liberal finally can hear and join the Hallelujah chorus. Intellectual integrity, social relevance, amplitude of perspective, and the spirit of true liberation offer no less. So, my colleague, the Reverend Tony Lorenzen, sums up the 5 smooth stones in 5 words only. This will be a lot easier to remember. Evolution, freedom, justice, agency, and hope. Evolution, freedom, justice, agency, and hope. Those are the 5 smooth stones of liberal living religion gifted to us by our forebears. I'm sure that you have seen the news about the Dakota Access Pipeline. Since April, there have been protesters on Sioux land standing in the way of the construction of an oil pipeline. The pipeline was actually originally going to cross the Missouri River, but it was moved out of concern that it could contaminate the water supply to Bismarck, and so they moved it closer to reservation land. The Standing Rock Sioux has said that they were not properly consulted on an issue that affects their safety and health, that the construction of this pipeline will cut through burial grounds, sacred places, will destroy the future of their people by erasing their past and their holy spots, will destroy what they understand themselves to be, making it impossible for the children and future generations to understand who they are and where they come from. You heard in LaDonna Brave Bull Allard's words exactly that sentiment, this deep connection to the land and its places, and this deep need for sovereignty, a connection that is being ignored, and a need that is being and has been for centuries systematically denied. In April, just a few were gathered, but now there are over 1,000 from the Sioux and other tribes, from religious groups and activist groups. And these protesters, or we might properly call them protectors, have had some violent interactions with the oil company and with riot police. Dogs, mace. Just yesterday, over 80 of them were arrested. As these protectors, march, hold banners, chant about love, they are chased with tanks and cruisers. And I'm not so naive as to think that greed and power will easily give way to love, but it does make me sad that a people's sacred places would be so willfully defiled, that a people's right to safety and clean water and health would be so summarily dismissed. It reminds one, of course, of Flint and the lead in the water there. It reminds us of our own pipeline here that will run close to Indian Point. Inevitably, it seems those communities most at risk for water pollution, contamination, outright destruction in the case of a nuclear meltdown are poor minority communities. There are so many layers of injustice, historical acts of violence compounded by contemporary acts of violence. We are destroying our planet, and we are doing it first and foremost in marginalized communities, communities that are seemingly powerless. The Standing Rock Sioux have called their protest camp the Sacred Stone Camp, named for the stones that would form in that swirling of the river. Sacred holy stones, stones that 60 years ago were effectively stolen. Never again will that water smooth those stones. But LaDonna Brave Bull Allard reminded her people and the world, in that piece we heard part of this morning, that those smooth stones are not the only smooth stones the Sioux people have. They are not the only gifts from the past, the only weapons they possess. Together they have voices to cry out, the strength to stand up, the power to organize, and in this day and age, technology to tell the world what's going on. if the world wants to listen. There's been, it's true, a lot going on in the public arena in our country, but the pipeline protest has gotten pretty short shrift, I think. Is that because those who will be most affected are American Indians? Because it's out there in the center of the country where we kind of don't really know what's going on? Or because we constantly feel paralyzed by the question of climate change and the planet's safety? Or because of the challenging perceived tension between our need for things like oil versus our need for clean water? Honestly, I suspect it's all of those and probably more. In many ways, it does feel like climate change and big oil and the modern values of greed and selfishness and isolation are Goliath. And we often feel like just that lowly shepherd, David. We wonder what we can do. In fact, the author and famous environmentalist Bill McKibben wrote just last week about this question he's most often asked. And you might guess it, the question he gets the most is, what can I do? And he's realized that the question itself is flawed. He writes, the problem is the word I. By ourselves, there's not much we can do. Yes, my roof is covered with solar panels, and I drive a plug-in car that draws its power from those panels. And yes, our hot water is heated by the sun, and yes, we eat low on the food chain and close to home. I'm glad we do all these things, and I think everyone should do them. And I no longer try to fool myself that they will solve climate change. The right question is, what can we do to make a difference? Because if individual action can't alter the momentum of global warming, movements may still do the trick. Movements are how people organize themselves to gain power. Enough power, in this case, to perhaps overcome the financial might of the fossil fuel industry. Movements take care of their own. They provide bail money and they push each other's ideas around the web. They join forces across issues. Black Lives Matter endorsing fossil fuel divestment, climate justice activists fighting deportations. They recognize that together we might just have enough strength to get it done. Each of us, McKibben is recognizing, is free to make better choices to affect the yet unfolding of this universe. And we have to, together, he believes, by organizing power, work toward a more just future. He hopes this and believes this enough that his answer now to that question, what can I do, is this. The most important thing an individual can do is not be an individual. Join together. That's why we have movements like 350.org or Green for All, like Black Lives Matter or Occupy. If there's not a fight where you live, find people to support. From Standing Rock to the Pacific Islands, job 1 is to organize, and jobs 2 and 3. Together, using the gifts and talents we are given, we can be like David, overcoming the odds. Seemingly powerless, but overcoming a seemingly unstoppable foe. It is possible if we use the smooth stones we have been given.
Each weekend, we make an offering from the bounty we are blessed to enjoy. We do this in a spirit of generosity, aware that we have benefited from those who have gone before, those who in their turn gave generously. The offering goes to support the mission of our congregation to seek, connect, act, and love. Each month, we share the plate with a justice-seeking organization or effort. If you are visiting, there is no expectation that you will participate in the offering. Consider yourself our guest. For those of us who regularly participate in building and who also then benefit from this congregation, we ask you to remember that it is your regular and sustained giving that makes this congregation work. Please give generously. This month's Share the Plate recipient is Clearwater. The offering will now be given and gratefully received.
studied art history, there are many David images, prints, frescoes, paintings, sculptures. He's everywhere. And there are two that always stick out in my mind, both by Renaissance greats Donatello and Michelangelo. I don't know, some of you may know these sculptures. Both of them are realistic depictions of a human being, but they are very different. Donatello's David is a young man, scarcely more than a youth. This jaunty hat, you should look it up. And Michelangelo's is this strapping, muscular man. It doesn't matter, though, in some ways. It doesn't matter because it's not David's height or lack thereof, or his muscles or lack thereof, that led to his success. He won because he used the tools he knew, that he'd known his whole life. He knew or trusted or risked or hoped that 5 little stones and a sling were going to win him the day. And maybe his smooth stones weren't actually the stones, right? Maybe they were, we can speculate, the skills he'd learned for years protecting his flock of sheep, his ambition to make a better life for himself, the courage he came by naturally. We have our own 5 smooth stones. Organizing power, exercising freedom, casting a vision for something better than we have. Knowing that the future is not sealed. And hoping. Always hoping. These are the 5 smooth stones we have been given by our past. The 5 smooth stones we can use to slay the modern giants of greed and disconnection and selfishness and isolation. These are the smooth stones we can use to create a better world. They are our sacred stones, our slinging stones. Not many of us are David. Maybe more rightly, none of us are David. None of us, no matter our form, can stand alone and right the wrongs, win the day, triumph over a seemingly unstoppable foe. And none of us are powerless. Not when we recognize our connection to each other, to this earth. We can't forsake the communities we build. We can't forsake the communities beyond our own, our human community. We cannot forsake this planet, all that we have ever known, likely all we will ever know. Rather than turn our backs on all that is, we have to reach deep into our satchels, take out what we know, what we believe, what we are committed to, and stand up for this planet and for each other in ways individual and collective, small and large. May we all remember that even when we feel tiny in the face of a giant foe, we are not powerless. We are not alone. We are not without skills and gifts and inherited knowledge and sacred powers. May we work hard to restore health, protect the earth and its people, and bring about a brighter tomorrow. Blessed be. Please rise in body or spirit for our final hymn. The number is 163.
Peace.
our benediction are by Mark Bellatini. Go in peace. Live simply, gently, at home in yourselves. Act justly. Speak justly. Remember the depth of your own compassion. Forget not your power in the days of your powerlessness. Go in peace.
Or more likely.